Death Valley. The name itself sends a shiver down the spine. It is the hottest, driest, and lowest place in North America, a landscape that holds within it an unparalleled beauty and a truth far more profound and far more brutal. Every year, millions of tourists are drawn to its strange allure. They come to witness the sunrise, to gaze at the star-studded night sky, and to stand in awe of nature in its most extreme form. But this beauty is often a deception. This desert is not just made of sand and rock. Its every grain is infused with stories. Some are tales of triumph, of survival, and some are tales of vanishing forever. In the summer of 1996, a family from Dresden, Germany, came to this wilderness in search of their American dream. Egbert Rimkus, his girlfriend Cornelia Meyer, and their two sons, Georg and Max Meyer. They came with a thirst for adventure, but Death Valley had other plans for them. They would become entangled in a mystery that would consume and haunt people for decades. This is not just a story of getting lost. It is a chronicle of an unrelenting search. It is the story of those who risk their own lives to find answers for others. It is the story of people like Forrest Haggarty, who learned to question the desert's silence. Egbert Rimkus was an architect from Dresden. In the wake of the Cold War, he dreamed of a new life in a unified Germany. He, his partner Cornelia, and their two boys, Egbert's son Georg and Cornelia's son Max, were a happy, blended family. Egbert held a deep, romantic fascination with the American West. Cowboys, the Wild West, the songs of John Denver, these were all part of his imagination. For many East Germans at that time, America was this romantic ideal. The vast, open spaces of the West were a symbol of freedom. Egbert was that kind of man. He didn't just want to see America. He wanted to feel its raw, untamed spirit. On July 8, 1996, the Rimkus Meyer family arrived in Las Vegas. Their American adventure had begun. They rented a minivan and planned to tour California's famous national parks, with Death Valley high on their list. They carried a guidebook that described some of the more remote but spectacular spots in the park. Their main objective was the geologist's cabin, deep in Butte Valley. It's a place reached only by a rough, treacherous track not meant for the average tourist. But for Egbert, this was the real adventure. July 22, 1996, the family entered Death Valley. The heat that day was suffocating. Park rangers at the entrance station typically warn tourists, especially those planning to travel on backcountry roads. But for some reason, there is no record of the family having a direct conversation with a ranger that day. They stopped at the tourist hub of Furnace Creek. They purchased a few items, including a visitor's guide in German. Then they headed towards their ultimate destination, down a path that would lead them far away from the known world. To reach the geologist's cabin, they had to take Warm Springs Canyon Road. This road is not suitable for a standard passenger vehicle. It requires a high-clearance four-wheel drive machine. Their rented Plymouth Voyager was a family minivan built for city streets. In Death Valley, we always say, know your vehicle and know your limits. In the summer, conditions can turn deadly in an instant. One wrong turn, one flat tire, and you're in a situation you can't even imagine. Taking that minivan into Warm Springs Canyon was a fatal mistake waiting to happen. Their German guidebook mentioned the route, but perhaps it didn't adequately convey the level of danger involved. Or perhaps Egbert, filled with adventurous spirit, believed he could handle it. This confidence may have been their first critical error. This is the geologist's cabin. Visitors who make it here sign their names and leave messages in this logbook. Flipping through the pages from July 1996, one can see the names of many tourists. But there is no entry from the Rimkus Meyer family. They never reached their dream destination. After July 22nd, they were never heard from again. Where did they go? What happened to them? They seem to have vanished into the vast emptiness of Death Valley. The return date for their rental van came and went. Frantic calls from family in Germany went unanswered. A German family had disappeared in America, but for months nobody knew anything at all. October 23, 1996. Nearly 3 months after they vanished, a routine flight was underway in the skies over Death Valley. The helicopter crew was on a surveillance mission, searching for illegal drug cultivation. As the pilot and an officer flew over the incredibly remote Anvil Canyon, they spotted something unnatural. There, half buried in the sand of a dry wash, was a minivan. The location was so remote, so inaccessible, that no ordinary vehicle should have ever been there. Park rangers were notified and dispatched to the scene. When we found the van, our first question was, how did it get here? This isn't a road, it's a wash. It was clear the driver had made a wrong turn, driven down this wash, and gotten the vehicle hopelessly stuck in the soft sand. The vehicle was a Plymouth Voyager, matching the description of the one rented by the missing German family. The van was locked. The rangers broke a window to gain entry. What they found inside only deepened the mystery. Inside the vehicle were their passports, their wallets containing nearly $1,500 in cash, traveler's checks, and an expensive camera. Their tent, sleeping bags, and other camping gear were all there. Most baffling of all, there were unopened food packages and several nearly full bottles of water. It was just bizarre. Normally, when people get stranded in the desert, the first thing they take with them when they leave their vehicle is the most precious commodity, water. But here, almost all the water was left behind. It looked as if they had perhaps gone for a short walk to find help, planning to return quickly. But there was no sign of human life for miles around. No footprints could be found. The wind and shifting sands had erased any tracks. 4 people, 2 adults and 2 children. Where had they gone? Did they set out on foot? If so, in which direction? And why would they leave behind the very thing they needed to survive? The discovery of the van triggered a massive search and rescue operation. Helicopters, search dogs, and hundreds of volunteers began to comb the area. They explored every possible direction, every canyon, every ridge. But their greatest adversaries were the sheer scale of Death Valley and its extreme environment. But weeks turned into months, with no results. Not a scrap of clothing, not a single footprint, nothing. The unforgiving nature of Anvil Canyon seemed to have swallowed them whole. Eventually, the official search was called off. The case of the Rimkus Meyer family was relegated to a cold case file, an unsolved mystery. But for some, the story wasn't over. There was a small, dedicated group of people, fascinated by Death Valley's mysteries, who could not let this case go. Among them was Forrest Haggarty, an experienced hiker and desert explorer. He and other desert sleuths like Tom Mahood decided to dedicate themselves to solving the mystery. How can 4 people just vanish like that? In the modern age, how is that possible? There has to be a clue somewhere, something the official searchers missed. These amateur but fiercely determined searchers began to reanalyze the data using digital maps, satellite imagery, and their own extensive experience in the desert. They knew the answer was out there, hidden somewhere in the wilderness. They just had to know where to look. This quest would lead them on an incredible journey spanning more than a decade. While the official search had ended, Forrest Haggarty and his associate Tom Mahood refused to give up. They took the case on as a personal challenge. They understood that conventional search methods had failed. They needed to think like the lost. Our first job was to understand their psychology. They're stranded. They're surrounded by hundreds of miles of desolate wilderness. No cell service. What were they thinking? They had a map. They would have tried to walk toward some form of shelter, or a road shown on that map. We had to figure out those probable paths. They used probability theory, creating a map of likely routes based on how lost people typically behave. They hypothesized that the family had walked east from the van, towards the nearest paved road and an outpost of the Naval Air Weapons Station China Lake. Although the outpost was abandoned, it might have been marked on their map as a potential haven. For years, Haggarty and his team returned to Death Valley time and time again. On each trip, they would search a new sector. They went to places helicopters couldn't land, where the average person would never set foot. It was an agonizing task, like searching for a needle in a continent-sized haystack. Every time we would come back empty-handed. It was frustrating. Many people told us we were wasting our time, but we knew that for that family, for their relatives back in Germany, finding an answer was essential. They deserved to know what happened to their loved ones. That drive is what kept us going. Then, in the spring of 2009, nearly 13 years after the family disappeared, a crucial clue emerged. Haggarty and Mahood were searching a small canyon about a mile and a half east of where the van was found. There, under a creosote bush, they found a beer bottle. The bottle was a European brand, Carlsberg. It wasn't commonly available in the U.S. at the time. But this was the exact same brand of beer that had been found inside the family's minivan. This was the first piece of physical evidence that the family had indeed walked east from the van. Finding that bottle was a huge moment for us. For the first time in 13 years, we had confirmation that we were on the right path. They were here. They walked this way. It gave us renewed hope. This single clue changed the course of their search. Now they had a specific direction of travel. They realized the family had likely attempted a shortcut, a decision that led them deeper into the unforgiving desert. The only question now was, where did this path lead them? After finding the beer bottle, Haggarty and Mahood refined their search grid. Their new theory was that the two adults, Egbert and Cornelia, might have pushed on ahead for help, possibly leaving the children in a relatively safer, shaded spot. Their mission was to find that trail. November 2009. Haggarty and Mahood returned once again to Death Valley. This time, their target was an area that had been overlooked by all previous searches. It was a rugged, rocky plateau, extremely difficult to access. The weather wasn't great that day. The wind was howling. We were close to giving up, thinking we'd come back empty-handed again. I was standing on a rise just scanning the area, and suddenly my partner, Tom, called out to me. His voice had a quality I'd never heard before. There, scattered beneath a lonely bush, were the skeletal remains of two human beings. Years of exposure to the desert sun, wind, and wildlife had taken their toll. But there was no doubt. These were human remains. Next to the bones, they found a wallet. Inside was Egbert Rimkus's identification card and a picture of his son, Georg. Finally, after 13 long years, the mystery was beginning to unravel. These were the remains of Egbert Rimkus and Cornelia Meyer. Subsequent DNA testing confirmed their identities. Forensic analysis concluded they had died from severe dehydration and heat stroke. They had made it nearly 4 miles from their stranded vehicle, but civilization was still many, many miles away. With the adults found, the most heart-wrenching task remained: finding the children. The location of Egbert and Cornelia suggested they had left the boys somewhere behind while they pushed on for help. The searchers began to trace their potential path back. A short distance away, they found some of the remains of 11-year-old Max Meyer, along with one of his shoes. The scene was devastating. The thought of a child perishing alone in this desolate wilderness was unbearable. That was the hardest part. We were looking for answers, but the answer we found was just heartbreaking. As an adult, you can take risks, but when you think of those children, what they must have gone through, it's very difficult to accept. Tragically, no remains of Egbert's 13-year-old son, Georg Weber, were ever found. It is presumed he met the same fate, but the desert had claimed his final resting place, leaving no trace behind. So, what finally happened? Piecing together all the clues paints a picture that is both tragic and cautionary. The Rimkus-Meyer family, driving down Warm Springs Road, likely took a wrong turn into Anvil Canyon, mistaking the dry wash for a shortcut. Their minivan got stuck in the soft sand. They likely waited by the van for a day or two, hoping someone would come to their rescue. But when no help arrived and their water supply began to dwindle, they made the most difficult decision of their lives. They would try to walk out. They were likely aiming for the China Lake Naval Base outpost shown on their map, believing it was a source of help. They couldn't have known the outpost had been abandoned for years. They were chasing a mirage. At some point, when the children could walk no further, Egbert and Cornelia likely left them in a shaded spot and pushed on for help. It was the ultimate act of parental sacrifice. But in this desert, that sacrifice was in vain. They both succumbed to the elements a short distance away, and the children they left behind would also fall victim to nature's relentless cruelty. Without the perseverance of Forrest Haggarty and his team, this mystery might never have been solved. They didn't do it for reward or recognition. They did it for a sense of justice for one family and for the closure of their relatives in Germany. This story teaches us to respect nature. Death Valley is incredibly beautiful, but it is not a forgiving place. One small mistake, one bad decision, can lead you into a situation from which there is no return. The Rimkus family weren't foolish. They were simply unprepared. The winds still blow across the floor of Death Valley, carrying with them countless untold stories. The tragedy of the Rimkus Meyer family is one of those stories, a permanent reminder of how small we are in the face of nature's vast power. Their dream vanished into the desert mirage, but their story lives on as a timeless, solemn warning.